Hello, Dr. Sanjeev.
Yeah.
Yes, you are live, sir. You can start your presentation.
Good evening, friends. At the onset, I'd like to thank Team Librate for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on chronic kidney disease, a role of the primary care physicians with you all. Over the last few years, Librate has emerged one of the foremost knowledge sharing platforms, and I personally have learned a lot about other specialities whenever I go to this Librate platform. So let's today as you all know, we are in an epidemic of chronic kidney disease, and the number of nephrologists all over the country in India is about 1,500, and we are not enough to manage this epidemic, and I'll show you why. But first of all, when I talk of chronic kidney disease, I am reminded of this quote by Alvin Toffler. I picked up this quote from late President Kalam's book Wings of Fire. And it says the illiterate of the future are not those who can't read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And in that sense, the medical fraternity is the most learned of the lot. Even during this period of lockdown, we are spending hours trying to learn new concepts, unlearn some of these old concepts. So, what do you understand by chronic kidney disease, or how would you make sure that a person has got chronic kidney disease? Now, this is the National Kidney Foundation Kidney Disease Outcome Quality Initiative Working Group, which has simplified the definition. Presence of markers of kidney damage for more than 3 months. So you need to have markers, and the duration should be more than 3 months. Now, what are these markers? They could be either structural or functional abnormalities. By functional abnormalities, we mean reduction in the glomerular filtration rate, abnormalities in the blood like raised urea or creatinine, or structural abnormalities like shrunken kidneys on the ultrasound. However, a more simpler definition is that if you do a calculated glomerular filtration rate, and if it is less than 60 and you measure it at least twice over 3 months, then you don't need anything else. That itself is suffices for a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease. But if the GFR is between 60 and 90, then you cannot label someone to have chronic kidney disease unless there is something else, that the ultrasound is showing shrunken kidneys, or there is proteinuria or hematuria or something else. Okay. Now, chronic kidney disease is important across specialities. It's important for the surgeon because perioperative renal dysfunction can happen, and the fluids, electrolytes will be guided, but depending on the kidney function. He also, if somebody's got chronic kidney disease, a person who is operated, then we need to make sure that he's not getting NSAIDs. For the anesthetist, again, fluid and electrolyte balance is paramount, and a lot of these patients with chronic kidney disease have hyperkalemia, fluid overload. You need to be very careful. For the physician, a lot of drugs need modification depending on the level of kidney function. All antibiotics, some antihypertensives, anticonvulsants. For the obstetrician, the level of kidney function prior to conception is one of the most important factors that will affect the outcomes of both the mother as well as the baby. For the radiologist, who the patients might be coming in to the radiology department for either a contrast CT or an angiogram, uh, they need to be sure that the kidney function is normal before they subject these patients to contrast study, because if they don't and the kidney function worsens, we are all in a medical legal era, they can be, you know, it can cause acute worsening, acute kidney injury can happen. For the intensivist, fluids and electrolytes, drug dosing, and for the cardiologist, as I mentioned again, before subjecting them to a coronary angiography, the cardiologist needs to be sure that the level of kidney function is normal. If the kidney function is abnormal, then we need to start prophylaxis for contrast nephropathy in terms of hydration. We also need to start a couple of other drugs. So it's important across the board, regardless of whatever you are doing, you need to be sure what your level of kidney function in your patient is. So I'll picked up some actual cases from my practice over the last 3 decades. And this is a 44-year-old lady. She presented to us at Fortis Hospital in 2007 to the emergency with breathlessness and accelerated hypertension. When we went back into the history, in 2003, there was actually a history of accelerated hypertension. And at that point of time, other than an electrocardiogram, an echo, which showed left ventricular hypertrophy, so non-invasive cardiac evaluation was done. She was put on atenolol and pretty much forgotten until she came to us in 2007. And at this point of time, her creatinine was 8.4. Her ultrasound showed bilateral contracted kidneys. And to her horror, we told her that she had stage 5 chronic kidney disease. She was initiated on maintenance dialysis. She underwent a transplant in 2007, and today she is about close to 14 years post-transplant. Creatinine is normal. So she at that time she was a school teacher. She went on to do her PhD, and now she's teaching in a college. So that's what kidney transplant can do today as far as rehabilitation is concerned. The question she often asks me is, could something have been done in 2003? And the answer is yes. If someone was more careful to look at kidney functions, you would have added life to her years as well as years to her life. Another patient, I'm sure that you would have seen many such patients. A 50-year-old diabetic comes to you with history of swelling of feet, diminution of vision, headache off and on, has had blood pressures of 180 by 110 when I saw him in the clinic, had anemia, edema, fundus showed retinopathy, hemoglobin of 9, creatinine of 4.4, which the number actually looks very innocuous to some of us, but translates to an estimated glomerular filtration rate of only 22 mils per minute. Mind you, the normal filtration rate, we'll come to it, is about 100 to 120. So there's no doubt he's got diabetic nephropathy, and if this patient has a right inguinal hernia, presents for surgery, we need to be sure that the fluid electrolytes are regulated. He could present to a physician with acute gastroenteritis, worsening of kidney function. He could have chest pain requiring an angiography, and if someone inadvertently gives him contrast, he is surely going to end up on dialysis if he is not given contrast prophylaxis. Again, abdominal pain presented to the radiology department for a CT would again, the contrast would result in worsening of kidney function. There's another patient that was referred to us by a physician friend of mine. He was a 63-year-old gentleman, diabetic for 9 years, had edema, blood pressures 130 by 80. He did a screening for urine microalbuminuria, which was negative. The serum creatinine was 1.3, which a lot of us, I'm sure, would pass it off as normal. Ultrasound showed normal sized kidneys. And he wasn't sure why the edema is there, and he asked us to have a look at it. Could the edema be due to renal in origin? The question is, does this patient have chronic kidney disease? And we'll look into it over the next, we'll revisit this patient. So I've divided my talk into 3 halves. We'll first look at the early diagnosis, kidney function tests. We'll look at the clinical approach. We'll look at the options for renal replacement therapy. Now, how do you diagnose chronic kidney disease? The simplest and most easily available test is a urine analysis. And what should you look for? If the first morning specimen, the urine specific gravity is 1010, that is very low, dilute urine, despite an overnight period of fasting, that means this patient has got chronic kidney disease. And loss of concentrating capacity is one of the earliest markers of renal insufficiency. Albuminuria is again a hallmark of kidney disease. And a urine sediment, if done properly, gives you a wealth of information. If there are RBCs and RBC casts, it's acute glomerulonephritis. If there are WBCs and WBC casts, it's acute pyelonephritis. If there are broad casts, then you're dealing with chronic kidney disease or chronic renal failure, as we call it. But I'm sure all of you have encountered patients walking into a clinic with a urine report showing from the lab showing NAD, and the lab is being very honest about it. NAD means not adequately done. So I think whenever we are in doubt, we should look at the urine ourselves. Despite our busy practice, we can have a paramedic to help us centrifuge the urine, put it on a slide. But if you do it yourself, especially where the diagnosis is not clear, at least for myself, I can vouch for it. It has always helped me in reaching a diagnosis. So after a routine urine examination, the second important test is a urine albumin quantification. So as I mentioned, microalbuminuria is a hallmark of kidney disease. And earlier on, we used to burden our patients with 24 hours urine collection. The only change that has come over the last decade is that now we are doing the first morning specimen. And as you can see, the urine albumin creatinine ratio in the first morning specimen correlates very well with the 24 hours urine albumin excretion. So all you need to do is, here you need to do a urine albumin and creatinine, whereas in 24 hours, you could get away by just doing the 24 hours urine albumin excretion. And 30 to 300 is microalbuminuria. It is one of the earliest signs of kidney disease, and more than 300 is overt proteinuria. So the two tests I've told you are good routine urine examination, and second is urine for albuminuria quantification. What to do if a patient is test positive for microalbuminuria? Well, don't get excited. Transient microalbuminuria can be there just after a bout of fever, after a heavy exercise. If somebody has had a session in the gym or done a morning jog and gives a sample for urine, sure enough, you'll pick up microalbuminuria. Or if there is something like a urinary tract infection, minute amounts. So it is very important to reconfirm microalbuminuria at least 3 times over 6 months or twice over 3 months to make sure that this patient is microalbuminuria. And in all diabetics, we do at least 5 years from the onset, once in a year. In NIDDM patients, at least once a year. Now, I take you back to your MBBS days, and I'm sure all of you would have seen this chart in a textbook of medicine by Davidson, and this tells you that, and we've all believed that urea and creatinine is the gold standard for diagnosing chronic kidney disease. This is all we were taught, and we believe that urea and creatinine is really the ideal way. But if you look into this chart a bit more carefully, you will see that what we believe was 24 karat gold is not really true. So this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and as you can see, this is the GFR. The normal GFR is about 120 to 100, depending on what your age is. And as you see, the GFR starts declining here, and this is the level of serum creatinine. And the serum creatinine will first rise once the GFR falls below 60. So between 120 and 60, the serum creatinine is not a perfect marker for diagnosing renal dysfunction. The urea actually starts rising at a GFR of 30. So what do? You're going to miss, if you're relying on urea and creatinine, you're going to miss CKD early on. And this is a normal range of glomerular filtration rate, 120 to 125, 10% lower for women. And GFR declines with age after 40 years, 1 mil per minute per decade. And in children, adult values are attained as young as 2 years of age. So this is what you need to remember. Now this I'm going to demonstrate the perils of using the serum creatinine to guess the level of renal function. So now there are 3 individuals with the same serum creatinine, and a lot of us would pass it off as normal. At least when I was doing my MD, this patients came to me, I would say that serum creatinine is normal in all these 3. But as a nephrologist, obviously now, our guidelines have become more precise, and we do a calculated GFR. We do a CKD EPI equation, and we calculate the GFR, and I'll do it for your benefit in each of these individuals. So a 24-year-old man, the CKD EPI equation is used, the GFR is more than 60. And if there are no other abnormalities in the urine or no structural abnormalities, as I mentioned in my earlier definition, then this patient can be given a clean sheet. But yes, if he has some other abnormalities, then this patient could have chronic kidney disease. A 63-year-old gentleman with the same serum creatinine of 1.3, the GFR is only 59. And if you reconfirm it once over a 3-month period, then you don't need any other test. You can safely put a label of chronic kidney disease on this patient. And an 80-year-old lady with the same creatinine of 1.3, the GFR is only 42 moles per minute. And do it once more, and yes, this lady actually has got stage 3B chronic kidney disease. And I'll come to the stages later. So what I'm trying to tell you is, do not believe the serum creatinine, and the same serum creatinine can imply totally different levels of kidney function. So we have simplified things for you, and you can do a quick calculation of EGFR if you know only two parameters. Well, even you don't even need to know the newer calculator don't need to know the weight. So just do the put in the patient's age and put in the creatinine, and it will also ask you whether the ethnicity is white or black. We come as uh, non-black, and you'll get the level of kidney function. So it's a 63-year-old patient who's a male, who's non-black, who weighs about 85 kg, serum creatinine of 1.6, and these are the different calculators. Currently, we recommend CKD EPI 45.2, and somebody whose weight is 40. Again, as you can see, the weight is a material, same GFR. So all you need to know is the age and the serum creatinine, and I call it KYG. Know your GFR. We all do KYC. We should also do KYG, not only for all our patients, but for yourselves too. You should know your own GFR to begin with, and then try and tell that to your patients too. So I come back to the consult that we saw in internal medicine. The 63-year-old gentleman, diabetic for 9 years, edema, BP 130/80, no microalbuminuria, which made us think that he could have normal kidney function, but the serum creatinine was 1.3, EGFR 59 mils per minute. So we discharged him with a possible diagnosis of chronic kidney disease. We called him a month later in our clinic, and the EGFR was still the same, the serum creatinine was the same, and this patient actually had chronic kidney disease, and the edema was indeed renal in origin. Now, this is a study that we did at Fortis Vasankunj when I just joined. What we did was we dug up the records of 774 patients who were coming for preventive health checkups over a 6-month period. So these people over 770. Now, most of these people came for preventive health checkup either because their pre-employment mandated it, or some of them were vigilant enough, and so they had come and gone with a clean sheet. And we looked at the records, and we found that 74 of the 774 actually had a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease, which works out to about 9.56%, were totally asymptomatic. And this is how early kidney disease is. And these are the different stages. So we stage chronic kidney disease from stage 1 to stage 5. Majority of them had stage 3 chronic kidney disease. That is 7.4%. 1% had stage 2 chronic kidney disease. Another 1.3% had stage 1 chronic kidney disease. Now, none of them had stage 4 and stage 5 chronic kidney disease. Not surprising, because they had come for preventive health checkups. They were asymptomatic. They were relatively healthy individuals. But what I'm trying to say is that chronic kidney disease in the early stages is asymptomatic, and it's fairly common. The actual prevalence in community studies in India is about 17%. So if you are seeing 100 patients in your clinic, and if you are careful enough to measure the EGFR, about 17 of them will have chronic kidney disease, and they didn't even know about it. So after looking at kidney function tests, let's see how would you approach these patients. A lot of times I'm asked in my CMEs, what are the warning signs of chronic kidney disease? Well, I tell them almost none, but yes, if a patient has high blood pressure, please investigate for chronic kidney disease. If you have proteinuria, hematuria, if you have creatinine and blood urea nitrogen outside the normal range, and as I showed you, EGFR of less than 90. Symptoms, more frequent urination, very non-specific, can be in an elderly gentleman with prostrate. Difficult or painful urination can be due to UTI. But yes, if they are there, make sure that you look at the kidney function. Puffiness around the eyes, swelling of the hands and feet. Edema is very late, as I showed you. But if it is there, surely think of chronic kidney disease. So does the patient have renal disease? Well, if the GFR is below normal, answer is yes, especially if you have done an albumin creatinine ratio, which is mandatory if the GFR between 60 to 90. If it's less than 60, then you don't even need. But it is a very important prognostic marker. So besides the GFR, you need to know the urine albumin creatinine ratio, and thereafter you can, classify the patient into different stages. These 5 stages of chronic kidney disease, and each one is divided into A, B, or C depending on the level of proteinuria. Stage 1 is more than 90 EGFR with A, B, C. A is no proteinuria, B is mild and C is moderate proteinuria. 60 to 89 stage 2, 30 to 59 stage 3, stage 4 is 15 to 29, and stage 5 is, we call it kidney failure, when the GFR is less than 15, and these patients should either be subjected to a kidney transplant or they can be put on dialysis. Now, what is the importance of making a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease? So this is a study which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2004, a community study which showed that after adjustment, the risk of death increased as the GFR decreased below 60. The hazard ratio was 1.2 for a GFR between 45 to 59, 1.8 between 30 to 44, 3.2 between 15 to 29, and 5.9 times greater risk of dying if the GFR was less than 15. But what's interesting is that most of these patients here, the asymptomatic, either GFRs of 45 to 59, 30 to 44, also had a hazard ratio of 1.82 to 1.8 risk of death. So there was an independent graded association between reduced eGFR and the risk of death, and the cardiovascular events, hospitalization in a large community-based population study. And these findings highlight the clinical and public health importance of making a diagnosis of chronic renal insufficiency. There's another study published in Lancet in 2008, done in South Korea, nearly 500,000 individuals followed up for 13 years. The prevalence of CKD was nearly 12%. And there too, and South Korea, mind you, has got a reasonably good healthcare system. 3.5% of the participants only were aware that they had chronic kidney disease. They had an 83% higher mortality for all cause and 100% higher mortality for a cardiovascular disease. So that's the importance of your making a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease and telling this patient. This is a study from Italy, where when the eGFR calculation was done, the prevalence of CKD was 23%. So out of 100 people, 23 had chronic kidney disease, but a physician diagnosis was made in only 4% because they were relying on the serum creatinine value. And blood pressure control in patients with CKD was there in only 11% in stage 1 and stage 2, 13% stage 3, 10% in stage 4 and stage 5. And this is one of the most important things, good blood pressure control to slow down progression. So if until and unless you will not be very aggressive about blood pressure control, and the norms for CKD patients are far tighter than the general population. We'll talk about this later. Now, this is CKD and cardiologist. So if the GFR is more than 90 and the patient has CKD, so stage 1 CKD, the mortality rate is still 4.1 per 1,000 population, and most of it is cardiovascular mortality, GFR 70 to 89, which would be missed if you are just doing a serum creatinine. The mortality is nearly doubling, and less than 70, the mortality is 5 times. And mind you, here also you will not be, if you are using on serum creatinine values, you will miss at least between 60 to 70. So that's the importance for a cardiologist. So these patients who have got chronic kidney disease, they need to be screened for cardiovascular disease, and we can do a lot of preventive cardiology here. Importance for the obstetrician, effect of pregnancy on renal function. Well, there is an accelerated deterioration of renal function in some patients with chronic renal insufficiency. The prognosis depends on the degree of renal dysfunction at the time of conception, as well as the presence and extent of comorbidities, specifically hypertension and proteinuria. So lower the eGFR, lesser the chances of successful outcome. And renal function is most likely preserved, especially with mild renal insufficiency. Diabetic, if these ladies have diabetic nephropathy, there is an acid progression is as many as 45% of these patients. SLE, 50% of them will get a lupus flare and a fetal loss in half of these patients. And interestingly, the etiology of CKD is irrelevant to the prognosis. It is only the level of kidney function, and then thereby you can easily prognosticate. And this is how we divide kidney function in these pregnant ladies. The GFR is either serum creatinine between less, this is micromoles per minute. 125 would roughly translate to 1.5 serum creatinine. This is 1.5 to 3, and this is more than 3. So serum creatinine of less than 1.5, some of them would have hypertension, 10 to 20% would have preeclampsia. And here there also, in mild renal insufficiency, there is a higher risk of IUGR and prematurity in the newborn. Moderate renal insufficiency, 30 to 50% will have hypertension, 40% will have preeclampsia, 30 to 50% of these babies will be either IUGR or premature. And severe renal insufficiency, majority of these ladies will have hypertension, 80% will develop preeclampsia, and nearly 60 to 70% IUGR and prematurity. So it is critical for the obstetrician to know what is the baseline kidney function so that she can prognosticate the patient about the obstetric as well as the fetal outcome. This is the renal outcome. So if mild renal insufficiency, 26% of these ladies had problems during pregnancy. Successful obstetric outcome was there in 96%, long-term renal problem less than 3%. So these ladies can be given a green signal. Between 125 to 150, nearly half of these patients have problems during pregnancy. Successful obstetric outcome close to 90%, but long-term renal problems in as high as 1/3. So these patients should be counseled against pregnancy and advised to go in for something for either adoption or we have other options available. And severe renal insufficiency, 86% will have problems during pregnancy. Successful obstetric outcome less than half, 53% of them will have worsening of kidney function and would progress to end-stage disease. So there's no doubt that these ladies should be totally counseled against going in for pregnancies. So even there is a mild renal insufficiency, 16% of these ladies had a decline in the study by Katz et al., and 6% progressed to peripartum end-stage renal disease. So it's not without risk, but moderate renal insufficiency, look, 1/5 of all the pregnant patients progressed to end-stage kidney disease within 1 year. And severe renal insufficiency, half of these patients progress to end-stage renal disease within 1 year of delivery, regardless of what their etiology of kidney function. So it's the level of kidney function which is critical. You may not know what the level of cause of kidney disease is. Now we are in an era, where we require a multidisciplinary approach as a team approach to manage patients. It's not difficult to understand why, because as physicians, we often know everything but end up doing nothing other than arguing the pros and cons and differential diagnosis. In contrast to surgeons who end up often know nothing but try and do everything, and they will make a diagnosis by surgery. Dermatologists are the luckiest of the lot. Know nothing, do nothing, get the patients get better. And pathologists are the most knowledgeable of the lot. They know everything, they do everything. They will tell you your diagnosis, but often a day too late at autopsy. Now, next, when should the patient be referred to a nephrologist if you have made a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease? Well, at the earliest, even in stage 1 to 3, because you need a stamp of approval or validation for planning and management. Otherwise, if you just tell them he's got chronic kidney disease, he'll not believe you. He'll go to some alternative therapy practitioner and then land up only once, the battle has been lost. And thereafter, the follow-up with a nephrologist every 3 to 6 months, finally at a stage when renal replacement therapy is required. And this is, again, the suggested continuum of CKD care. So stage 1, stage 2, and early stage 3, the primary care physician is the frontline physician. And the nephrologist is there at the back, confirming the diagnosis, following this patient intermittently. But stage 3B, stage 4, stage 5, the nephrologist assumes the frontline load because there are a lot of comorbidities. These patients require an active renal care, and the physician is certainly there at the back hold to for any day-to-day issues, monitoring of blood pressure, looking at hydration, all other things. So it's a joint approach between the primary physician as well as the nephrologist. Now, what therapy can be offered, or can any therapy be offered? The answer is a definite yes. If we make efforts early, we can slow the progression of chronic kidney disease. We can't stop or we can't reverse it, but definitely we can prolong the life of the kidneys. And what can you do? First and foremost, meticulous blood pressure control. Blood pressure is less than 130/80 or 120/75 if there is proteinuria. Diabetics, meticulous blood sugar control, and we have two landmark studies, the diabetes complications and control trial and the UK PDS study, which showed that optimal blood sugar control is critical in reducing the microvascular complications, and one of them is diabetic kidney disease. Reduction of proteinuria, use of ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers, even when these patients are normotensive, because proteinuria is a surrogate marker for chronic kidney disease. So even if the patient is normotensive, do add on an ACE inhibitor or angiotensin 2 receptor blocker, or these patients are hypertensive, use either of these agents upfront, but definitely we don't combine. Management of anemia, prompt management of anemia by iron, folic acid, erythropoietin prevents a lot of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality, and definitely also slows down progression of chronic kidney disease by improving oxygenation at the renal microcirculatory level. Bone disease is again, chronic kidney disease is associated with renal osteotrophy or renal bone disease, and it is easier to prevent it than treat it. We use phosphate binders targeting phosphorus levels, and high phosphorus levels can cause severe cardiac dysfunction. We use 125 activated vitamin D and severe hyperparathyroidism. We have also used a molecule called cinacalcet. All patients of chronic kidney disease are at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease, and these patients should be on atorvastatin from the time the chronic kidney disease diagnosis is established. Uric acid in chronic kidney disease, and there has been some change in as far as the management of hyperuricemia and chronic kidney disease is concerned over the last few years. We have realized that hyperuricemia leads to increased mortality in chronic kidney disease, mainly cardiovascular mortality. Hyperuricemia is highly prevalent in patients with chronic kidney disease, and recent studies show that in patients with stage 3 or stage 4 chronic kidney disease, hyperuricemia is an independent risk for all-cause and cardiovascular disease mortality. Uric acid is not only a marker for decreased kidney function, but a causal factor for disease progression, as has been shown in this studies over the last 5 years or so. We have now changed our strategy, and we are targeting hyperuricemia very aggressively, targeting uric acid levels of less than 6.5, and you can get significant improvement of renal function if you use this uric acid lowering agent. A very simple intervention is bicarbonate supplementation. This was a landmark study published in Journal of American Society of Nephrology 2009. 134 adult patients with chronic kidney disease, GFR 15 to 30. So they already had stage 4 chronic kidney disease, and serum bicarbonate 16 to 29. Some of these patients were given oral bicarbonate supplementation, the other one given this standard for care, and a very simple and cheap intervention like sodium bicarbonate supplementation slowed the rate of decline of renal function as assessed by the creatinine clearance to just 1 ml per minute per year, compared with more than 2.5 ml per minute per year in those patients who had not received sodium bicarbonate therapy, significantly reduced the number of patients who progressed to end-stage kidney disease. So we are aggressively using sodium bicarbonate in all our chronic kidney disease patients, but mind you, it contains a significant sodium load, so you need to be sure that the blood pressures are under good control, because otherwise the benefit will be offset by the hypertensive-induced progression of kidney disease. Now, can we predict which are the patients of chronic kidney disease who are going to progress rapidly to stage 5? Well, there's a calculator. This is available again, which you need to plug in the age, the gender, the urine albumin creatinine ratio, the calcium, phosphorus, albumin, and bicarbonate values, and you will get the risk of progression. And this again, if you have all these values, you can train your paramedic, and he can finally, if you give this value to the patient, it is very important, because the patient is immediately, will be cautious and much more compliant. Well, what are the do's and don'ts for the patient's point of view? First and foremost, strict control of blood pressure, as I showed you. Strict control of blood sugars, compliance with diet. And there are a lot of myths here as to what the patient should eat and what should not eat. But chronic kidney disease patient, there is very, very minimal role of protein restriction, only if you are taking a non-vegetarian high protein diet. If a vegetarian, you take a normal protein diet. Compliance with medicines, regular follow-up. What not to do? Well, definitely avoid smoking, because smoking, I think, is pure poison for CKD patients. Avoid definitely alcohol, because it can worsen your hypertension. Occasional alcohol is social drinking is okay, but regular alcohol intake definitely is harmful. Avoid substance abuse. Most importantly, avoid painkillers, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And now we have another list, another drug that has been added, which is called proton pump inhibitors. Both of them have been shown to be associated with chronic kidney disease. And avoid native and herbal medicines. We have seen quite a few patients ending up with acute kidney injury as well as rapid progression in those who took these native herbal medicines. We have presented this our experience in international conferences. Now, what therapy can be offered to CKD? Well, there's a lot you can do, and this is a simple mnemonic. You can paste it in your clinic. A to F of CKD, as I call it. A stands for anemia and albuminuria. So correction of anemia, reduction of microalbuminuria. B stands for blood pressure, bone disease, and bicarbonate. C stands for cardiovascular issues, including cholesterol. D stands for diet and drugs. E stands for enhancing growth, very important in children with CKD. Early referral to a nephrologist. And F stands for establishing fistula, which should be done in all patients with stage 4 chronic kidney disease, so that when they'll end up in dialysis, you don't have to put a internal jugular catheter, because that increases a lot of mortality and morbidity. When to offer dialysis and transplant? Well, preemptive transplant should be the norm for all CKD patients. And when the GFR falls below 10, we counsel these patients for a preemptive kidney transplant, making sure there are no reversible factors, and could be done earlier in diabetic patients, who are getting severe hypertension, fluid overload, and especially in children between 15 to 20 also, because growth is impaired in these patients. And quick transplantation and reversal of uremia is itself one of the most important growth factors. Certainly, if there are symptoms and signs of uremia and malnutrition, there's no doubt these patients should be offered dialysis and transplantation. What are the options? Well, renal transplantation is the gold standard, but quite often we know that patients are not prepared. So in these patients, you can do either maintenance hemodialysis or continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. Maintenance hemodialysis has to be done 2 to 3 times a week. Continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis daily, every day. Now, many of times have been asked, which is better? Is transplantation better or is hemodialysis better? And I'll show you some data now. The annual mortality rates for patients under dialysis range from 21 to 25%, which means that if you are starting 100 patients on dialysis today, at the end of 1 year, 1/4 will not be alive. Whereas if you do a cadaveric transplant, 92% would be alive. If you do a living related transplant, 96% will be alive. And the benefit of transplant is most notable in young patients, especially those with diabetes. So this is the projected years of life. If a 20 to 39-year-old gentleman gets a dialysis, he would be living for 20 years, but the moment he gets transplant, an extra 11 years is added. If it's a diabetic patient, just 8 years on dialysis, but the moment we do a transplant, this is the average survival, mind you, 3 times better survival, 25 years. There is no doubt that transplantation is the best way to go. And earlier on, we used to depend upon blood groups for kidney transplant, but now we can do transplantation across blood groups. We can also do transplant without steroids. So we can steroid-free transplant, especially in children, which enhances growth. If there are 2 families where the blood groups are incompatible, we can do a paired kidney exchange. The donors can donate across the family, which is permitted by the law. And cadaveric transplants, which is done from brain dead donors. So this is what a conventional kidney transplant is. The O is the universal donor, can donate to an O, A, B, or AB. A can donate either to AB or A, B can donate to AB or B, and O, unfortunately, can receive a kidney from only a simple principle of blood donation, O. This is what is normal, but what do we do in ABO incompatible transplant is, let's say there's a gentleman whose blood group is O, and his donor is A, his wife is A, no other donor. So what we do is that we remove the antibodies, anti-A antibodies from this person by doing plasmapheresis. We prevent new antibody formation by using immunosuppression like tacrolimus, MMF, and rituximab. And once the antibody levels come below a critical threshold, which is generally 1:8, we do a kidney transplantation. And this is now a well accepted and extremely successful mode of treatment. The other number two treatment is hemodialysis, and the hemodialysis is definitely an effective method to remove blood waste in a short period of time. It is advantages. It's performed by trained professionals, security of in-center care, regular contact with the other patients and staff. Treatment is usually performed 3 times a week. And the other advantage is you're not burdened with equipment at home. This is a young boy who's on dialysis, but these patients have to come to a center either 2 to 3 times a week. This is a dialysis machine that you see on the background. So they need to be hooked up for at least 4 hours. The other option is peritoneal dialysis, and in peritoneal dialysis, we use the peritoneal membrane, which is the lining of the abdomen, and it's a semi-permeable membrane. What we do is a special solution, peritoneal dialysis fluid, is put into the abdominal cavity, and the peritoneal cavity is very vascular, rich in the capillary network, and because of this, there is diffusion of the toxins, the urea, creatinine, and other uremic solutes across this semi-permeable peritoneal membrane into this peritoneal dialysis fluid, and thereafter, after 4 hours to 6 hours of indwell, this fluid is drained out and fresh fluid is placed, and we do this during the day about 2 to 3 times. One time at night. This is continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, which is done manually. It can also be done by a machine, which is called automated peritoneal dialysis. And the machine does it while the patient is sleeping at night. And the only disadvantage is, yes, automated peritoneal dialysis is a bit more expensive because you're using a machine and special equipment. So to sum up, whom should you test for CKD? All diabetics, all hypertensive patients, all patients with cardiovascular disease, with the structural renal tract disease, renal calculi, prostatic hypertrophy. If there are multiple multi-system diseases with potential kidney involvement, like SLE, family history of stage 5 CKD or hereditary kidney disease, or there is opportunistic detection of hematuria or proteinuria. So to conclude, we need to make an early diagnosis of chronic kidney disease. How do we do that? By screening high-risk patients. And what are the tests? I showed you all earlier: a urine routine, a microalbuminuria, and an EGFR estimation. A nephrology referral should be done, and there's a collaborative approach between the primary care physician and the nephrologist. I've already showed you stage 1, stage 2, stage 3A. The primary care physician is the frontline physician, where the nephrologist is there at the back. Stage 3B, 4, and 5, the nephrologist takes over, but this physician is still there. It's a joint approach. Whenever you see a patient for chronic kidney disease, make sure you look for reversible factors like obstruction, dehydration, infection, and many times we correct this. Accelerated hypertension, we correct this. There is a slight improvement in kidney function, and this patient will be very grateful to you. Put into place measures to retard progression of chronic kidney disease. Discuss with the patient upfront the options for renal replacement therapy, at least in stage 4 chronic kidney disease, so that they are mentally prepared. And once the patient reaches stage 5 chronic kidney disease, then we offer renal replacement therapy depending on the choice of the patient. And this is Sanjay Gandhi PGI earlier, which I was there before I moved on, and I'm currently heading the Department of Nephrology at Fortis Escorts Group of Hospitals, New Delhi. And I end on this note. Thank you. If there are any other questions, you can put them in your chat box, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Sanjeev. Thank you for sharing this, sir. It was an insightful session and informative. And I thank you on behalf of all the audience and doctors who joined today and from Library. And we look forward to host you again in future, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and good night, everybody.